We should start with the next session. Most important, HER2 targeted therapy in breast cancer, integrating new options. And we have first and foremost talk of role of TDM1 in breast cancer management today by Dr. Devrat Arya, who is a leading medical oncologist in Max Hospital. And Dr. Devrat would be talking about TDM1. He has quite a good experience in TDM1. Dr. Devrat, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, sir, for the introduction. Thank you, Dr. Minu. Thank you, Dr. Gopal, for this opportunity. And I hope my slides are visible.
Yes,
I'm
sir.
audible.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So this is a sponsored session. I'd like to thank Roche for the slides. I'm going to, over the next 15 periods, briefly talk about the role of TDM1 in breast cancer management. And the talk is going to be divided into two halves. One is the newer data where we use based on the Catherine trial. And second is obviously its role in the metastatic setting. So we all know that Kadcyla or TDM1 is an antibody drug conjugate. It combines Herceptin with emtansine, which is a mitansin derivative, which is a microtubule inhibitor. The targeted delivery of the drug ensures that there is a better therapeutic index, so better efficacy with lesser toxicity. We know that post Catherine, there is now space for using TDM1 in the adjuvant setting for those patients who have had a non-PAT-CR in a HER2/neu positive locally advanced breast cancer. We all know that early breast cancer, the target of treatment is cure. However, unfortunately, as per data from the West, up to 70% of patients who eventually have metastatic disease have in fact a relapse from an early breast cancer. And therefore, it's endeavor of all the oncology community to try and improve the outcomes with lower relapse rates in this setting. Now, for a patient who has been started on neoadjuvant chemotherapy with Herceptin post-surgery, irrespective of pathological response, for quite some time, the standard of care was continuation and completion of the remaining cycles of Herceptin with or without radiation and target hormone therapy if indicated. While we do know that there has been some improvement in the overall outcomes with the escalation of treatment, we've looked at affinity with the addition of pertuzumab. We've also looked at neratinib, ExteNET study with the addition of neratinib in the adjuvant setting post 1 year of DFS. But despite these additions, we still know that a significant number of patients will have a relapse. Now, one of the first studies to change the paradigm slightly was CreateX trial, which looked at capecitabine for patients who did not achieve a PAT-CR post-neoadjuvant treatment. This study obviously excluded HER2 positive patients, included hormone receptor positive and triple negative patients. And it was something similar, in terms of premise, where the Catherine trial was designed, where patients with locally advanced breast cancer, patient could have a clinically T1 to T4 N0 to N3 M0 at presentation who had a HER2/neu positive setting and who are being randomized to receive neoadjuvant therapy, minimum 6 cycles, minimum 9 weeks of taxanes, with or without anthracyclines, and at least 9 weeks of trastuzumab, and then had residual invasive tumor in the breast or axillary nodes. And after the surgery, who were then randomized to receive either TDM1 for remaining 14 cycles or continuation of Herceptin. And the primary endpoint of this study was invasive disease-free survival, and secondary endpoints being DFS, OS, and the duration of recurrence-free interval and safety. So we all are aware of the results of this study. It met its primary endpoint. It reduced the risk of invasive disease-free survival. The hazard ratio was 0.49 for the entire group. So that's nearly a 50% reduction risk of recurrence in terms of invasive disease-free survival. So the IDFS improved from 77% in the Herceptin arm to 88.3% in the Kadcyla arm. Now, when you look at the pattern of recurrences, again, overall recurrences were lower with Kadcyla, and Kadcyla also prevented what were distant recurrences when you compare it with the Herceptin arm. What was very interesting was that there were, while T1A and T1B N0 tumors were excluded, clinically T1C N0 tumors at baseline could be included if they did not achieve a PAT-CR, And a lot of us would think that this is a very early subset of patient and therefore may or may not derive benefit from switch to Kadcyla if they don't achieve a PATCR. Again, numbers were very small. We're talking about 77 patients who had a clinically T1N0, but it did appear that the IDFS events in the Kadcyla arm were lower. In fact, there were none in the Kadcyla arm, whereas there were 6 in the Herceptin group. Again, very small numbers, but these numbers do suggest that there is some benefit in switching to Kadcyla if there is lack of achievement of PATCR. What about the pattern of prior neoadjuvant therapy? So while most of these neoadjuvant treatment would comprise of chemotherapy along with Herceptin, in the study, up to 18% of patients actually did also receive pertuzumab in combination with chemotherapy and Herceptin. And the hazard ratios are very similar irrespective of the targeted therapy use. So a very similar hazard ratio for even the Perjeta Herceptin arm with a 10.5% reduction in risk of invasive disease-free events. That's the reduction that is achieved with Kadcyla. What about HER2 status change? Now, this is a very interesting area where we do know that up to 5 to 8% of patients may actually lose HER2 expression post neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And the question that we've always asked is whether continuation of Herceptin or switching to Kadcyla actually gives them any additional benefit. Now, these are small numbers. If you look at this slide, only about 70 patients of all those patients who had a pre-operative or pre-surgical specimen available. So only about 8.3% patient had a change in HER2 status from what was at the baseline biopsy specimen, and this change from positive to negative. So these numbers are small, but even when you look at these small numbers, when you look at the arm which had a HER2 positive changing to HER2 negative, and despite that the switch to Kadcyla happened, there were no IDFS events compared to 11 IDFS events in the Herceptin arm. Again, this was a poster at ESMO 2020. Very small numbers, but very thought-provoking numbers as well. And at least showing that even in this setting, at least till we have further data, there's all the reason for patients who do not achieve a PATCR to be switched to TDM1. Now, what about CNS metastasis at first site of recurrence? Similar numbers in both the arms, while the overall event rates were lower. What about patients who had to receive concomitant radiotherapy and hormone receptor status? So I'd like to remind the audience that the patient could combine TDM1 with radiation therapy, and post completion of radiation therapy, those patients who had a ER and PR positive disease could start hormone therapy. And this, irrespective of whether they needed radiation therapy or not, irrespective of whether they were candidates to receive hormone therapy or not based on their hormone receptor positive status, the switch to TDM1 was associated with a similar reduction in invasive disease-free survival events. Now, what about the particularly high risk of recurrence? And we all worry about these patients who have heavy burden of disease. So when you look at patients who had high risk of recurrence, so patients who had an inoperable baseline locally advanced breast cancer, hazard ratio of 0.454 with switch to Kadcyla. Similarly, operable but node positive and hormone receptor negative, hazard ratio of 0.72. Operable with YP node positive and HR positive, or other similar subsets. Again, so there's data to show that there was benefit across subgroups and across the subgroup of high risk patients when the switch to Kadcyla happened. So clearly the efficacy data showing that Kadcyla reduced the risk of IDFS event by 50%, and in absolute terms there was a reduction by 11.3% at 3 years. Consistent benefit across all patient subgroups. And even if HER2 negative, at least whatever small data they could come up with, there does appear to be benefit with switch to Kadcyla rather than continuation of Herceptin. And OS data is immature at this point of time. What about safety? When you look at overall safety, most of the adverse events were low grade, manageable. We do see a lot more fatigue, nausea, reduction in platelet counts, but most of these adverse events are grade 1 and 2. When you talk about adverse events of special interest, particularly deranged SGOT, PT, and peripheral sensory neuropathy, higher with Kadcyla arm, but particularly when you talk about sensory neuropathy, 75% had resolution and 9% were resolving at the time of data collection in the Kadcyla arm. Cardiac events, no additional concern. In fact, in terms of absolute numbers, Kadcyla had lower cardiac events, so no increase in cardiac events as compared to Herceptin. And safety data showing that most of the adverse events are consistent with the known safety profile. Most of them are low grade, they are asymptomatic or reversible, and duration resolution rates are comparable between the two arms when we talk about peripheral neuropathy, and there's no adverse impact on quality of life. And I think clearly this data is showing that for patients who have a HER2 positive early breast cancer, who received neoadjuvant chemotherapy, who have not achieved a PAT-CR, I think now this is a new decision point where there is now data to show that a switch to Kadcyla is associated with improvement in these IDFS events, reduction in IDFS events. And then based on this data, most of the international guidelines are now recommending switch to Kadcyla if there's no PAT-CR. Now, very quickly coming to metastatic setting. So we all know that the Emilia study, which was published, I think Sunil Verma published it in 2012, looked at this population of patients. So these were HER2 positive, locally advanced or metastatic breast cancer patient who'd had prior taxane or trastuzumab either in the metastatic setting or who in the early setting had received chemotherapy and had progressed within 6 months of adjuvant treatment. They were randomized 1:1 to receive TDM1 at the standard doses or to what was at that point the standard of care, combination of capecitabine and lapatinib, and both the regimens to be continued till progressive disease. And the primary endpoint was PFS by independent review, OS and safety. And they were also looking at overall response rates and duration of response as key secondary endpoints. So this was the PFS data that came out from that study. Significantly longer PFS with TDM1, 9.6 months compared to 6.4 months with capecitabine lapatinib. Hazard ratio, a very robust 0.65. When you look at overall survival benefit, again, an OS advantage, 30.9 months with TDM1 compared to 25.1 month for capecitabine lapatinib, and an improvement in overall response rate as well. 43.6% with the TDM1 arm compared to 30.8% with the cape-lap arm, and a good duration of response, nearly double the duration of response with responses lasting for more than a year in the TDM1 arm compared to 6 months in the cape-lap arm. Not surprisingly, we know lapatinib capecitabine is a difficult combination. So overall adverse events and grade 3 adverse events were in fact lower with TDM1, less diarrhea, less hand-foot syndrome, vomiting as we would expect, but more thrombocytopenia, more derangement of AST and ALT in the TDM1 arm. And the median dose intensity, in fact, was also higher with the TDM1 arm, quite clearly a better tolerated regimen, and overall adverse event leading to reduction in doses or discontinuation also being lower with the TDM1 arm. What about adverse events in terms of cardiac adverse events? Fairly comparable outcomes. So no additional safety issues with TDM1 in terms of cardiac dysfunction. So clearly, Emilia showed that there was significant improvement in OS with TDM1 compared to lapatinib capecitabine, significant improvement in PFS, and improvement in other efficacy outcomes like overall response rate. It seemed better tolerated than the capecitabine lapatinib, and time to progression was also significantly delayed. And this, in fact, established it as a standard of care in this setting. Now, there's also a concern about the activity of TDM1 in CNS. Again, patients who had symptomatic CNS mets were excluded from this study. There are a very small number of patients who had asymptomatic CNS mets at baseline. And when they looked at outcomes of this subgroup of patients, TDM1 was in fact associated with an improvement in overall survival, even in this subgroup of patients as compared to capecitabine lapatinib. And clearly, this led to establishment of TDM1 as the standard of care in a second-line setting in HER2 positive metastatic breast cancer. Now, last part of my talk, very quickly. This is a phase 4 clinical trial that is originating from India. Small trial, not published yet, but Roche had shared these slides, so I wanted to share it with the audience. So 70 subjects who received TDM1 in a setting very similar to what we see in Emilia, so second line and beyond, and the outcomes were evaluated. So these were patients who had HER2 positive metastatic breast cancer who had progressed on first line treatment. And the primary outcome of this study was to look at safety, tolerability of TDM1, and then they were also looking at overall response rates and PFS and OS. So this is some of the data from that study. So duration of study treatment, I mean, the mean study treatment was continued for about 39.6 weeks, and the mean number of cycles was 13.24, and the median dose varied between 187 to 223 for the study population. When you look at adverse events, 40% patients in this subgroup had serious adverse event. 10 were considered to be related to TDM1. About 17.1% were not considered to be related to TDM1. And the grade 3 adverse events were, about 25.7%. The incidence of grade 1, 2 was much more than grade 3 as expected. And 2 adverse events of special interest were pneumonia and derangement of AST and ALT. When you look at platelet count decrease and hemoglobin decrease, only about 2 patients and 1 patient respectively had this problem. And when you compare the outcomes with Emilia study, again, this is a very small study, so we're talking about small numbers, but it does seem that apart from pyrexia, which happened a little bit more in this study, most of the adverse events were actually lower in this study as compared to the Emilia study. And so what about cardiac safety? No CHF events were reported in this study, although there were 2 fatal serious adverse events of cardiac arrest and cardiorespiratory arrest in 1 patient each. They were not considered related to the safety of the study drug. So they concluded that the safety profile in the limited number of patients that were included in this study was acceptable. There were no clinically significant changes over time. In terms of laboratory parameters, the safety profile seems consistent with what was reported in the Emilia study, and there are no new safety signals. What about overall response rate? So they looked at the overall response rate. There were no CRs, 23% partial responses, and another additional 57% patient had a stable disease in this setting. When they looked at median PFS was 14 months, and when they looked at median OS, they were actually not able to estimate the median OS. And this is, again, the data is in terms of at least median PFS, it's very consistent in fact, much better than what was reported from Emilia study. Again, this is a small study, limited number of patients, and therefore we need to keep that in mind. As I said, median OS was not estimatable in this study. So they concluded in terms of efficacy that the study, even in Indian population, had beneficial effects. Median PFS was 14 months. Median duration of response were in fact 15 months, which also is favorably compared to what was reported in the Emilia study, and stable disease in about 57%, responses in about 23%. And the efficacy profile, again, is consistent with what was reported in the Emilia, and showing that even in Indian population, the drug is effective and consistent with the major study. So I'll conclude by saying that Kadcyla is now approved in early breast cancer for those patients who have a HER2/neu positive locally advanced disease and has not achieved a PAT-CR. And Kadcyla is also approved in metastatic breast cancer in the second line setting for those patients who have progressed on trastuzumab and taxane. Thank you very much. Back to the organizers.
Thank you very much, Dr. Devrat, for an excellent talk. And now we have certain newer agents which have come now in the field of HER2 positive. And we have Dr. Ashish Joshi, who shall be speaking. He's consultant Mumbai Oncocare Center from Mumbai, and he shall be speaking on the most interesting topic of newer agents in HER2 positive breast cancer. Dr. Ashish.
Good evening, everyone. At the outset, thank you, organizers. Thank you, Dr. Gopal. It's been visiting after a long time since our GCRI days. And since Devrat has preceded me, so it's as if you're working in our postgraduate teaching class. So before wasting any further time, I would start my presentation. We are discussing newer agents in HER2/neu positive breast cancer. And a very small disclaimer that we are not going to talk about pertuzumab, we are not going to talk about trastuzumab, We are not going to talk about lapatinib. We are not going to talk about Kadcyla, because we believe that these are the agents which are approved, very well have established their place in the algorithm of HER2 positive, both early as well as advanced breast cancer. So when I was reviewing this literature for this particular talk, I was rather surprised with the amount of data that we have for newer molecules, and the horizon is becoming even bigger and bigger. As we all know that we have got a very deep response rates with the existing agents that we have, but since as we strive for betterment, this subset of patients could be benefited with a more and better newer molecules which are there in horizons. So let us see how they have going to change or rather impact our practice in near future. Mind you, many of these agents are probably not available at our disposal right now because of the lack of availability. But eventually, probably all of us would soon have these agents to be used for our patients who are suffering from a HER2 positive breast cancer. You obviously know the story of Mrs. Broadfield. She was the first one to receive a drug called as trastuzumab, and a drug has such a big impact that there is a book on it and there is a beautiful movie on it. So that's the story of HER2 that we know, and it's all started way back in 1970s when the drug started coming into foray and established its place in 1980s and 90s when it became a standard of care. So this is what probably we know as far as anti-HER2 targeted agent as we stand of today, that response rates of single agent trastuzumab could hover around 20 to 25%. PAT-CR with a combination of chemotherapy can go upwards of 70%. Response rates with addition of chemotherapy can go upwards of 50 to 60%. And as far as the overall survival is concerned, trastuzumab is one of the first agents to have shown significant survival advantage in the adjuvant setting, upwards of 6 to 7%. So these are the facts that we know, but we obviously, as I mentioned before, I reiterate here that we would want to strive for better. And really, do we have any further drugs to do so is what the discussion that we're going to have. So I'm going to discuss, these are the agents which I'm going to discuss now, two TKIs, neratinib and tucatinib, two drug antibody drug conjugate, which is called as trastuzumab deruxtecan, trastuzumab decoramazine, and then is one novel anti-HER2 monoclonal antibody called as mirvetuximab. So sorry, they're a little difficult words to pronounce, but probably that's how the biological therapies nowadays are spoken about. So we're going to speak about these few important molecules in a few of my next slides. So I'm going to divide my talk into two parts. One is something happening in the segment of adjuvant therapy and something happening in the segment of a metastatic setting. So if you tease out the data for the adjuvant therapy, and again, a very small disclaimer that I'm going to talk only about those drugs which have got good phase 3 data and which have got a punchy impact on the PFS or overall survival outcome in either of the setting. So in adjuvant therapy, the only probably a drug which is hovering or which is probably making an impact is an neratinib. And obviously then a second part of my talk would be on the metastatic setting, wherein you have got a plethora or rather avalanche of medicines at your disposal, as I had mentioned before, which we could be discussing subsequently. So as we all know that extended adjuvant therapy with neratinib, EXTEND trial approved in 2017. This is a cartoon which is often shown the multiple areas where anti-HER2 therapy works. And neratinib, as you know, inhibits the downstream tyrosine kinase pathway as far as the HER2 signaling is concerned. And that's how it has impact on the apoptosis and necrosis of the HER2 positive cancer cells. So neratinib is again an EXTEND trial wherein a stage 1 to stage 3 breast cancer patients after completing standard adjuvant 1 year of trastuzumab were randomized to receive either adjuvant neratinib versus placebo, and more than 2,000 odd patients were recruited. So it was a large study. And just to give you a compact outcome, there was 5-year DFS of 90.2% versus 87.7%, again statistically significant. So the invasive disease-free survival was far superior in the patients who have received adjuvant neratinib extended beyond 1 year of adjuvant trastuzumab. And if you could see the subgroup analysis, this is the hazard ratio for the overall population of 0.66 with a statistically significant p-value. But if you start seeing the subgroup analysis as they sort of defined before the start of the study, that those patients with that hormone receptor positive status had got a highest impact of with a HR of 0.49, and also those patients who had sequential trastuzumab post chemotherapy trastuzumab are the patients who received the maximum impact of adjuvant neratinib. We could probably debate the biological or pathophysiological basis of this particular data, but the data is quite telltale that there are certain group of patients who benefit far more with adjuvant neratinib compared with those patients who are probably do not get that much of incremental benefits. But if you see the overall group of patients, the hazard ratio of 0.66 with a statistically significant p-value has made FDA approved this particular drug as an adjuvant treatment for neratinib in the HER2/neu positive setup. Coming to the side effects and the toxicity, as what we have seen in most of the TKIs, diarrhea is the most troublesome toxicity. And these are the typical dosing regimen. It's available as a 40 milligram tablets. The recommended starting dose is 240 milligram. And depending on the level of diarrhea the patient could have, there could be dose modifications. And there is a standard loperamide prophylaxis which has been prescribed for the treatment of for the patients who are on neratinib treatment. Now, one could always debate about the feasibility of this particular drug, especially when somebody has completed 1 year of trastuzumab, to convince them for 1 more year of a toxic treatment, especially diarrhea being the troublesome side effects could be quite challenging. But at least we could sort of start understanding more about this particular drug. There could be subgroup of patients who could probably benefit with this particular group, especially in a HER2/neu positive setting, and especially those patients who have hormone receptor positive status, as has been seen in this particular study. So that is all about the adjuvant setting as far as the newer drug is concerned. But now once we move on to our metastatic segment, then obviously we have quite a bit of medicines at our disposal now. So I'm going to divide this talk into 4 parts. One is a drug called as neratinib, as has been discussed before in the metastatic setting. Then we have a drug called as tucatinib, again a second TKI with chemotherapy, again in a metastatic setting, had an FDA approval in 2020. Then an antibody drug conjugate, trastuzumab deruxtecan, again approved in 2019. And then in the 4th group, there are a lot of newer molecules which are something beyond horizon, which are not yet approved, but they're obviously knocking the doors in the treatment of HER2/neu positive metastatic breast cancer. So coming to neratinib, again, NELA was the big study. It's a phase 3 study wherein patients with HER2/neu positive metastatic breast cancer and were previously treated with more than 2 lines of HER2/neu targeted therapy, asymptomatic, stable brain metastasis allowed, which is very, very important. We see that HER2/neu positive patients do have a propensity for a CNS disease. They were divided into a neratinib capecitabine versus lapatinib capecitabine arm, and they were follow up until the progressive disease. Primary endpoint were overall survival and PFS, and the secondary endpoint was response rates and toxicity. No endocrine therapy was permitted in this particular study. These were the baseline population, quite matched in both the groups, and the number of patients also fairly equal in either of the groups. And this is the PFS, especially in terms of prospective median analysis and overall survival. So there were not much of a survival benefit, but there was a statistically significant improvement in the progression-free survival with the addition of neratinib to capecitabine versus lapatinib to capecitabine. And especially the risk of CNS events had significantly come down in the patients who were in neratinib arm compared with those patients in the lapatinib capecitabine arm. This particular Kaplan-Meier curve again amplifies the same concept that the time to intervention for CNS metastasis was significantly delayed. The patients who had received neratinib capecitabine versus lapatinib capecitabine, as has been seen here in this particular Grace test. And again, there is a statistically significant improvement in the CNS control compared with lapatinib. Diarrhea, again, as has been mentioned before, is the concerning side effects, but we can probably manage that with the appropriate prophylaxis and dose modifications. Lapatinib also does cause a lot of fatigue, and diarrhea is also been seen. so these are the basically the safety profile as far as the two treatment is concerned. Then coming to the second part is the tucatinib. Again, important TKI, works in a downstream signaling pathway very close to where neratinib works in a HER2/neu overexpressed cells, and that's how the mechanism of action of most of the tyrosine kinase inhibitors has been. So the approval and the impact has come from the HER2/neu CLIMB study, which is the phase 2 study, wherein patients with HER2/neu positive metastatic breast cancer who had prior trastuzumab, pertuzumab, and TDM1, and of course the brain metastases were allowed, were divided into tucatinib plus trastuzumab plus capecitabine versus placebo plus trastuzumab plus capecitabine, and primary endpoint was progression-free survival. Secondary endpoint, of course, was overall survival, and the response rates. These were the baseline patient characteristic. If you could see here, sizable number of patients had got CNS metastasis, and again, in terms of PFS benefit, there is a statistically significant improvement in the PFS with the addition of tucatinib vis-a-vis the second arm, which is placebo, and the hazard ratio was 0.54 was seen. HER2 CLIMB studies, again, the patient with brain metastasis, sorry, there has been significant improvement in the risk of CNS progression, as has been seen in this particular Kaplan-Meier curve, reiterating that these particular TKIs have probably got a stronger and a deeper impact in terms of CNS penetration compared with the lapatinib that is conventionally used in a treatment with metastatic breast cancer and CNS disease. The OS, again, there was 34% reduction in the risk of death and statistically significant improvement in the OS in total population in terms of trastuzumab, capecitabine, tucatinib vis-a-vis placebo. It tend to benefited almost all subgroup of patient, as it's been seen in this forest plot. But typically, a patient who had baseline brain metastasis had got a significant improvement in terms of disease control in the brain, and which is quite satisfying, because these are the group of patients which are the most difficult patients to treat in our clinical practice. The common side effect, again, diarrhea predominates. Then there is nausea, vomiting, fatigue, and stomatitis. But most of the side effects were fairly well manageable, especially the diarrhea part. If could tackled well, then these are manageable toxicity profile as far as the study is concerned. So from my take-home message for my neratinib, tucatinib, that these are the two TKIs which have got excellent CNS penetration. It could probably evolve as a standard of care for a brain metastasis patient, especially those who have received radiotherapy or a focal radiation. HER2/neu TKIs could also have a activity in a systemic therapy other than the CNS disease. And based on all this, in April 2020, FDA has approved tucatinib, and in 2017, FDA has approved neratinib in the patients with HER2/neu positive metastatic breast cancer who have progressed on more than 2 lines of anti-HER2 treatment. Coming to the last of my drug, which is trastuzumab deruxtecan. It is again a monoclonal, it is an ADC, that is antibody drug conjugate, similar to TDM1. And I would not want to highlight or relabor myself into the mechanism of action. Dr. Devrata has very well elucidated in previous talks. So this is how it particular drug works. And as you could see, a trastuzumab deruxtecan in advanced HER2/neu positive breast cancer. This is an open label multi-center phase 2 study where there was a head-on comparison between trastuzumab deruxtecan versus TDM1. And if you could see, a little complicated study design, but if you could see here, the response rates were far superior compared with TDM1. Also, in terms of PFS control, it was far superior, as has been seen in this particular forest plot. And if you could see in this particular plot, again highlighted here, all patients were fairly well benefited, but especially those patients who had previous pertuzumab use also had significant improvement in terms of they did not benefit, but those patients who had other anti-HER2 therapy actually had benefits. So these are the group of patients. The one which had received pertuzumab actually did not have benefits with this particular drug. Again, PFS benefit, as has been seen here with this particular antibody drug conjugate. The toxicity, again, overall population very fairly well tolerated. Hematological toxicity in terms of thrombocytopenia has been commonly seen, as has been seen with TDM1. Interstitial lung disease is one of the important side effect of this particular drug, as has been seen in the further TDF antibody drug conjugate, as we would see down the line. There could be we could have to manage that. So ILD is something which we'll need to look into when we are treating the patient with this particular drug conjugate. Again, there are few more studies. Again, this is again a phase 3 study which has compared trastuzumab deruxtecan versus investigator choice of treatment in the patients who have received prior anti-HER2 treatment. PFS again is the endpoint, and if you could see here, there is a significant improvement in the progression-free survival with the addition of trastuzumab deruxtecan in a patients with HER2 positive MBC. You could even stretch your logic further that there is some efficacy of trastuzumab deruxtecan in the HER2 low MBC patients, but probably this particular conundrum still remain investigational, and that obviously is not a standard of care. So trastuzumab deruxtecan approval is again based on HER2 positive patients who were treated with more than 2 lines of treatment, as has been seen in particular study, and depends on the phase 2 Destiny Breast 1 trial, depending on the overall response rates and the progression-free survival benefit which this particular drug gives. Coming back to my last topic is something going beyond horizon, and there are many other molecules which are there, but probably a couple of them which I would like to highlight here is the trastuzumab ducromycin is again one ADC conjugate, and it has shown some response rate in studies which are done. There are phase 1, phase 2 studies which are going on, and there is also a drug called as mirvetuximab, which is a novel anti-HER2 targeted monoclonal antibody, and we are actually getting a SOPHIA study, which is a randomized open label phase 3 study, wherein we are basically comparing mirvetuximab with trastuzumab in a patients with more than 2 previous anti-HER2 therapy in a metastatic breast cancer. Primary endpoint being PFS and OS, secondary endpoint being overall response rates by study. Interim analysis of this study is currently available, and if you could see here that the patients with mirvetuximab has got significantly improved investigator assessed PFS and overall survival. PFS benefit, OS data is still not available. So SOPHIA, again, safety study is that most of the side effects are similar to what trastuzumab has been. Cardiac side effects is there is no alarming concern as far as this particular study is concerned, this particular drug is concerned, and also it could be one of the important treatment strategy for treatment of advanced metastatic breast cancer. So HER2 treatment has changed and has probably gone beyond trastuzumab, pertuzumab, TDM1. We've got so many newer TKIs, antibody drug conjugate, and probably a novel monoclonal antibody also available now. So especially with the TKIs, it's a reasonable option for HER2 positive MBC in the third line setting. Tucatinib data is quite promising. Trastuzumab deruxtecan is a major new therapy approved for HER2 positive metastatic breast cancer. Mirvetuximab is unclear benefit because there has not been OS data which is there. It's still interim analysis. Still the data is quite wet. We don't have a promising long-term OS or PFS data of this particular trial, but it's again one of the emerging option. There has also been some studies about combining immunotherapy with anti-HER2 agent. I have not gone into the details of it because of the constraints of the time, but there is some exciting things happening in that segment as well. So this is how it is. A bend in the road is not the end of the road unless you fail to make the turn. So we always thought that trastuzumab is the end of what we are looking as far as the treatment of HER2 positive MBC is concerned. But I think things have gone long way, and we have got newer TKIs, newer antibody drug conjugate, and possibly a novel monoclonal antibody, and possibly addition of immunotherapy, which could probably change the horizon in which we would approach this patient in near future. Thank you for your patient hearing. Thank you.
Dr. Julka is there, or? Thank you, Ashish. That was very beautifully captured. And I think we move on to our next session. So that is going to be a panel discussion, and now real world cases and possibly the various scenarios which will be captured by Dr. Nitesh. So over to Dr. Nitesh to invite his panelists.
Thank you very much, ma'am. It's always
good to share views. We heard very interesting talks. Can I make sure all my panelists are there? Almost like an attendance is, I think I can see Piyush. Piyush is there.
Only Dr. Sumant is not there, sir.
Okay, Dr. Suman's not there. So Piyush is there, Samit is there, Shifali is there, Dipanjan is there, and Dr. Priya Tiwari is there too. Okay, excellent. Now, very interesting things. I think we've had some great scientific discussion, but really the question here is how do we put it into practice? So I will tend to go more from neoadjuvant therapy to maybe a metastatic situation, but let's talk generally about the neoadjuvant because I think that and the adjuvant itself is very confusing. So this is a 55-year-old who has a big neglected tumor, T4, N2, N0, and his ERPR negative, HER2 is 3+. She has a negative BRCA and germline mutation testing. And if I can start maybe with Piyush first, would you start this patient with neoadjuvant therapy or would you go straight for surgery with adjuvant therapy planned later?
No,
Cost
sure.
is not a
For
constraint.
neoadjuvant therapy, now that we have learned all this while, that definitely neoadjuvant therapy, we have modifiers down the line after attaining the needful response of neoadjuvant and looking at the pathological responses. So definitely neoadjuvant therapy and more of
So I
for
think
the systemic disease.
Yeah, so I think simple, straightforward, every guideline accepts that for patients who are actually locally advanced, we do need to consider neoadjuvant. But yet there are debates on less than some really locally advanced tumors. So the question is when you go back and you see the guidelines, which talks about more than 2 centimeter and or positive axilla and questions like this, would you consider this only in high risk or borderline high risk or actually even low risk? Let me start, Piyush, with you, and then I'll ask Samit to take his call on this as well.
So Dr. Nitesh, anything above T2, whether node negative as well, our surgeons are also in sync that we should now look towards neoadjuvant.
A patient requiring mastectomy as a patient choice, would you still, for the T2 and 0, maybe a T2 and 0, literally 2.1 centimeter, pick up a neoadjuvant strategy?
That can always be looked into. I mean, there are certain, at times, patient preferences which overcome the whole decision. But in principle, T2 and above, we are, as a team, what we are practicing is neoadjuvant.
Okay. Samit, do you do the same?
Yes, sir. I agree with Dr. Piyush. We do the same. We try to convince our surgeons, since this patient is HER2 positive, it needs some sort of debate, but eventually they do agree. And in this case, the patient is hormone negative as well. So then what line of defense is already lost there? So definitely would like to see for the response upfront and then take him further.
And if I may ask, why do we want to do that? I mean, I think I understand node positive. I understand T4 tumors because we are not likely, or we are going to get a difficult close margin or positive margin. But in an operable node negative patient who wants mastectomy, what advantage are we giving by giving neoadjuvant therapy? Samit, you can start on this, and then I can ask Piyush again before I'm.
So the studies have actually shown that using upfront targeted based along with the chemotherapy, achieving a pathological CR does translate into a good disease-free survival and may go on to have a good overall survival later on. And definitely the use of chemotherapy, the responses what you can achieve upfront will not be seen once you have already operated the tumor. So breast being a systemic disease now, the systemic treatment should be given upfront.
And Piyush, your take?
So the my thing is that in a T2 or small tumor, basically, I would definitely look at most of the times what I would get in the pathology report would be a PCR. So the thing is, I would be happy to convey that PCR and know the natural history of disease and convey it confidently to the patient that what is going to be the outcome that I can expect. That is a survival of above 90% probably. Looking at the PCR, that would make me happy in terms of knowing how would the disease behave.
Okay, so I have changed
We have
my
data
view.
for triple negative and HER2 news. So
Yeah. So
that would be the.
I have changed my view on this in the past few years, where I have gone from saying it does not really matter other than informing the patient to now considering escalation and de-escalation very carefully. And in that respect, and Devrat showed actually in T1C as well, and there was data on Catherine on pertuzumab alone as well. So I'm more and more inclined. Could I have everyone else's mic off, please? There's some noise in the background. So I'm more and more inclined to Geeta, you need to have your mics off. Geeta, please can you have your mic off? Okay. So I'm saying the more and more I'm seeing information and experience coming on escalation and de-escalation. I don't think Geeta can hear. So somebody will have to call her. But I'm inclined to use this more as a strategy. Okay, I'll move on. So going on to Shefali now. Shefali, what would be your preferred neoadjuvant therapy? And I will ask the same question to Dipanjan and Priya as well. And if you can justify why one over the other, and they're all right answers, obviously.
Yeah, all right. I agree with all of the answer actually. And if I have to choose one over the other, so my take would be, okay, if young patients less than 50 years in say T2 and above tumors, so TCHP or AC followed by THP would be my choice. And if she is having any kind of comorbidity, say more than 65 years, I would tend to decide accordingly between a TCH or a lower down regimen, say Pecli and trastuzumab, depending upon what the comorbid condition is. Again, if the patient has cardiac comorbidity, again, I would like to scale down the chemotherapy, try to introduce one anti-HER2 first, and we know about that thing, and introduce maybe the second one. That's absolutely by your patient experience only. So when we don't
know what we're going to do actually there, but I think
worries.
cardiac and HER2
at least we know that anti-HER2 gives you a more amount of pathological CR, what we are looking forward to in such patients. And of course, in many of my patients, I have tried to use this thing, scale down chemotherapy and try to introduce anti-HER2 dual agent as required and take a call accordingly. So according to my preference, so AC followed by THP in young patients, say less than 45, followed by TCHP, then TCH or then I would prefer THP followed by FEC3. Yeah.
Dipanjan, your view on this and why?
I commonly use TCH, frankly, because most of our patient doesn't afford pertuzumab.
Okay.
If they can afford pertuzumab, I think TCHP, the data has shown as a neoadjuvant therapy, pertuzumab definitely has role. So as an adjuvant therapy, I do not use pertuzumab because that 1.9%.
And if I had changed point number 4 to AC followed by taxane, trastuzumab and pertuzumab, so it was AC, T and H and P. Would you choose that over TCH?
I think the role of adriamycin is more in younger female. So yes, I agree with Shefali at least partly that if it's a right-sided tumor, young patient, I may consider adriamycin, but otherwise, if we consider the previous randomized trial, which was also underpowered to find the difference. So TCH versus ACTH was not very similar.
Different. Yeah.
I prefer TCH because that suits my patients. Many of them come from far, so 3 weekly. So I think that it is more practical decision. As far as hard data is concerned, I do not think there is much difference between the two.
Okay, yeah.
Sir, so my impression is that for HER2 positive disease, dual HER2 blockade, if patient is affording, is the way to go forward. There we can decrease the dose. We don't need to use the doublet chemo also along with dual HER2 blockade. A single chemotherapy drug in combination of double HER2 new treatment suffices. If, however, patient does not afford the dual HER2, which is the usual scenario in one of them, then based on age, etc., another either option of TCH versus AC and AC into 4, that what Dr. Shefali said.
Okay, so I think there is a consensus here for once that if affordability is not an issue, dual HER2 blockade helps. we are in fact questioning that if we can use dual, do we need to come down on chemotherapy, or can we come down on chemotherapy? I'm not entirely sure, but I will accept what Priya said. And to my mind, if patient is very young or patient is very heavy nodal burden, or if it's a skin infiltration, I would bring in anthracycline if I can, unless there's a cardiac toxicity. So I think this is good summary of what everybody seems to be doing. Who is the right HER2 positive patient for NAC? I think we have kind of already touched upon anybody who's very high risk is for NAC. This has been covered very widely about the combination and the phase 2 studies, which showed, and they were slightly different. Their outcomes were different. One was safety, one was actually to see pathological CR, but essentially they gave us confidence that TCH, which was then standard, can be escalated up to TCHP. And I think we've seen very, very good responses, very sudden responses. In fact, if I may add, what used to be by 4th cycle, we certainly see post 2 cycles response. This patient had 4 cycles of AC followed by TH into 12 and underwent MR. But unfortunately and somewhat surprisingly, still had a significant disease left behind. Now, do remember that this patient had a T4 or T3 with a big nodal burden to begin with. And she ended up with only N1 lymph node, with 3 lymph nodes being positive, and was T2 there. Now, coming back to the first person in the queue, which was Piyush, what would you do now in the post-operative setting? Continue trastuzumab. As I said, initially cost was not a concern. We didn't use pertuzumab in the beginning. Maybe that was an error. But cost was not a concern. Would you use an affinity kind of thing or a Catherine kind of situation here, or continue with trastuzumab and maybe add neratinib later? There is data on that too.
So if cost is not a concern, definitely affinity data, the option 2 would hold good for me. And TDM1 would be the way to go because of this pathological poor response. Yeah.
So essentially you're saying that if the patient had come with surgery upfront, you would have added pertuzumab, but because the patient had neoadjuvant, you will go for Catherine and give TDM1. I'm right in saying that?
Yes, because there is the sort of benefit, the delta of benefit is definitely more.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
And Samit, what's your view on neratinib? I think there was a good discussion by Ashish on neratinib as well. What's your view on neratinib usage? I think I'm missing Samit there. Maybe his signal is poor. Can I come back to Shefali on that? Shefali, what's your view on neratinib?
Yeah. So there are 2 concerns about neratinib, that of course the hormone positive group benefited better than the hormone negative, and second is the diarrhea, the toxicity with neratinib, though it showed a significant improvement in OS also. So my first preference would be of course TDM1, and if not, then trastuzumab and pertuzumab for 14 cycle versus trastuzumab and neratinib. Of course, if patient have access to neratinib, that would be a choice.
I smirked because you stole my question for Dipanjan. I was going to throw a tough question at him that for whatever reason.
Shefali has been here always helped me. He knows I'm not good.
I was going to ask him that if the patient for whatever reason could not tolerate TDM1, neuropathy or myopathy, would you consider trastuzumab, pertuzumab for this patient?
Anticipated, and he knows that I am not good at breast, but I'm a good person. So that's a thing when you are a good person.
You are best always. You are best always.
Yeah, we will all vouch for that. We'll all vouch for that. So Dipanjan, if TDM1 was not a consideration for whatever reason, would you consider doing an affinity on this patient? He had neoadjuvant, so doesn't fit in the inclusion criteria, but has high risk disease. Would you consider pertuzumab for 14 cycles?
I don't know. In my practice, most probably daily practice, I would just consider with, I would of course try TDM1, but if you take TDM1 out of the equation, then most probably I'll just continue with trastuzumab. I am not really sure that pertuzumab in adjuvant therapy really works. It's an expensive way. I mean the 1% or 1.89%, if I'm
Yeah, but that was a combined risk. When you looked at the high risk group, node positive, especially N3 and 2
It
disease,
went to 4%.
yeah, it went up. It went up. So, and that 3% is not really a number.
if I remember correctly, that subgroup analysis was always post hoc analysis, and I don't put.
No, it was actually came out later, but it was not post hoc.
I don't remember that. I don't remember that.
Anyway.
Well, if you say so, but what I generally do in my practice is that I continue with I counsel the patient for TDM1, but if they cannot afford TDM1, I just continue.
So I'll very quickly go through this. This has already been discussed, which is Catherine. And do you think adjuvant TDM will build the efficacy gain from pertuzumab in that setting? So this is what Devra showed very nicely, that actually the hazard ratios were similar, the gain was similar. I again was very reluctant. I was very clear that we should shift everybody on anthracycline because the majority of patients was actually anthracycline group. But then this data came out and it came flat on my face, because although the numbers were smaller, but the pertuzumab group also and clearly had a hazard ratio which was significant. Priya, do you feel that it's equally effective to use pertuzumab? And I will push this to say, in a high node positive, in an N3 patient, 55, no cardiac toxicity, do you feel pertuzumab alone is good enough to consider Catherine?
So, sir, that means that we have given this patient adequate amount of chemotherapy and we have given trastuzumab. In spite of that, there is a lot of disease left. So that means the escalation of strategy is required. So yes, I would consider pertuzumab.
And if I clear non-anthracycline patient who for some reason can't take anthracycline and ends up with pertuzumab alone?
Still I would.
Okay. I think that's what I'm trying to understand here, and it seems quite clear that addition of TDM1 in any residual disease, irrespective of what was used in the neoadjuvant strategy for risk versus high risk versus moderate risk, will be considered. So back to Piyush, I'm almost doing a nice cue here. Thank you for that. If patient received a THP FEC3 as NAC and had some post-op, what would be your post-op regime? I think you've already answered TDM1. But if the patient had pathological CR, okay, if the patient had pathological CR, what would you do now, Piyush?
If pathological CR is there, then this was with THP and FEC. Okay, so I would just continue with
H.
The H. I think so. T is the docetaxel.
Okay. Yes. Docetaxel. Yeah. The patient had.
Okay. So.
Herceptin alone.
Just complete.
And would you continue pertuzumab or not?
Okay.
This was the LABC.
This was
LABC,
a THP.
N3, big disease, great response, pathological CR
yes,
from a combination.
If the winning combination was H and B, then I would continue H and B.
Excellent. Can I go to everybody on this, because I think I remain debatable on this. So what about Samit? Samit, would you consider quick yes or no, HNP or HLO?
Sir, HNP.
HNP. Okay. What about Shefali? HNP or HLO?
Yeah, definitely. I would go for a dual HER2 blockade. So initially, so much of burden of disease responded to the dual blockade. So complete that dual arm.
I will come back to Dipanjan. I think I know his answer. Priya, what about you? HNP or HLO?
No, sir, I'm not confident. I'm not sure.
Okay. Fantastic. Thank you for saying that. Dipanjan, because I'm not sure too. Dipanjan, what about you?
I think you see, you have used everything in your arsenal. So I don't know whether this pathological CR is due to epidubicin or it is due to the addition of pertuzumab. But I have a problem. I'm from West Bengal. I'm leftist, and I'm pro-poor. So I'm mentally also poor.
Okay, let me ask a different question.
Can I make a comment here?
No, I'll ask you a question. You make a comment on that, Shefali. Where will you de-escalate care if you do not de-escalate in a pathological CR from whatever neoadjuvant therapy? Where do you de-escalate care then? Only in a very low risk, or this pathological CR in a LABC would amount to de-escalation, which is 6 months of Herceptin. Remember that. and I'm saying I may still accept 12 years of Herceptin, but where will you use 6 months of Herceptin if you don't use in a pathological sphere? Shefali?
So, yeah, so if we see the rate of PathCR, so ACTHP or TCHP, there was no major difference. So actually the HP backbone, wherever it is used, so it gave a good amount of PathCR. So once something has achieved what we require and what was our intention to give neoadjuvant, so actually, I mean, I would consider to continue that backbone. Of course, low risk to start with, say T2N1 type of disease or T2N0 type of disease, maybe 60, 65 years old. Okay, with any kind of comorbidity, I would still think, okay, I'll continue the trastuzumab only arm. Otherwise, I'll give the benefit of dual blockade.
And Piyush, where would you de-escalate?
No, I agree with Shefali that until unless cardiac comorbidities or things like early stage T2, N1 would be there, where probably we can consider and discuss about an N1 disease pattern where we can probably discuss.
Okay, so I think
this was an N2 disease and a T4.
So I will openly say I'm most with Priya here. I don't know the answer here. I have thought about this very much, and I agree with both points of view that we have always said if something has worked that well, I want to give it longer, especially if it's non-toxic, and that's what both of you are saying. And equally, I have argued that is it worth the cost, and that cost, considering that the patient disease can still come back, the risk is still high, could have been used later for TDM1, and would that impact, and all those kind of questions. I think time will answer that. I know that data is being read of HNP versus H retrospectively in the US. I forget who was telling me about it, but somewhere. So we'll wait for that. But that's a very interesting debate that, to my mind, will continue till we have more information. But I think either are right strategies. I don't think 6 months is, but I think continuing H alone or HNP are right strategy, especially for that kind of response. Now, which one do you think are the most common high-risk factors for relapse after pathological CR? Samit, over to you. Samit, okay. I cannot find Samit there. So can I pass it on to, I think it's Dipanjan turn. Dipanjan?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know.
Okay. So Priya? Priya? Anyone? Any of the panelists? What would you consider is a high risk of factors for relapse after
most
pathological?
common high risk factor?
Yeah.
Most
common of few most common, yeah.
They are different. I don't know. Most
common. Let's keep it to most common. If nobody answers, I'll have to ask Gopal. He's the organizer.
Young patients, hormone negative, high burden of disease, high nodal burden of disease, or T4, you said skin infiltration.
No, Shefali, you have to pick one. That's why I said I don't know.
Okay,
I'll move forward. It is node and 3 and above. It remains a very high risk factor.
If I choose one, so high nodal burden or high volume of disease, I would pick up.
So I think that's where I was trying to point toward, that if I have a high nodal burden and even there's a pathological CR, I would be tempted for that group to continue HNP more than for others. Gopal, you not yet. I will tell you when to speak. Okay, where will you consider?
2 minutes only, Mitesh.
Okay, I started late. I still have only 2 minutes. Okay, fine. I will try and skip this. Patient received TDM1 14 cycles, 8 months later, headache, MRI, single cerebellar meds, received SRS, and then by SBRT, and unfortunately, soon afterward, leptomeningeal enhancement, CSF is positive. We'll start with Piyush again, and very quickly, we've heard some very good discussions actually on the metastatic use of HER2 positive. And Piyush on this occasion, and Dipanjan on this occasion, money is not a concern. She's come and say, I'm a billionaire and I can get everything from US within three working days. With that in mind, what would you use? Piyush, then Samit, and then we'll ask Shefali and Dipanjan and Priya.
So I think so with the patient receiving TDM1 and pertuzumab, now she's failing and post-SBRT disease and control. I think so. Tucatinib, capecitabine, and trastuzumab is one of the good combination to be considered. And she is only failing in the brain, is it?
Correct. Leptomeninges actually.
So yeah, tucatinib, capecitabine, and trastuzumab would be the
Anyone else would believe Enhertu would be
You
a better
haven't
option than
haven't
Laptap?
kept whole brain RT, Nilesh, as a option.
Okay, so that was an option. Patient refused. Now what are you going to do? Dipanjan, let me ask you straight then.
No, I think I agree with Piyush. I would go for tucatinib option because I am I have not used, but I'm a little afraid about the toxicity of neratinib. Whatever
Okay,
I
Enhertu?
think tucatinib plus capecitabine plus trastuzumab
Is Samit still there? Samit, are you there?
But is it
Yeah,
only
sir.
trastuzumab or the newer
So
trastuzumab?
that's Enhertu, which is not on this list actually.
Yeah, because you said patient has no money problem.
No money problem.
So maybe
No money problem.
trastuzumab deruxtecan I would use.
But okay, over to tucatinib because this is brain metastasis and that was a clear big inclusion criteria in the study. Okay, Samit, we have to close.
Sir.
I'll rush it up.
Yeah, I believe this patient has developed brain metastasis, and I think tucatinib seems to be a decent choice. I have not. I am currently using LabCap combination in such scenarios mostly, but believing based on the previous presentation, I think tucatinib, capecitabine, trastuzumab seems to be a decent choice.
I think that was a very interesting study, and I was particularly impressed by the fact that while they may have said whatever, but their emphasis was on brain metastasis, and so I feel, to my mind, for anybody with brain, I am more tempted to do tucatinib. Anyway, we use LabCap; it's a more advanced lapatinib in my mind. This was a rough proposed strategy which Roche gave to us on the slides, which basically said that if you've got a big disease and after neoadjuvant you have residual invasive disease, use TDM1. And the question is an ER positive about neratinib later, but in the pathological CR, the question is HP for 1 year and then the role of neratinib. And the question, there's a last question, but do you do brain imaging for everybody? And the second, how convinced are you of your Indian data, which I think was presented? Piyush about your MRI, Samit about MRI, and rest about the Indian data. Piyush,
No,
MRI
PET-CT.
for everybody.
No, PET-CT, if in case at all, and if symptomatic, then yes, MRI.
Samit?
No, sir, I'm not doing. I'll try to
Okay.
analyze as much as in PET-CT, not doing MRI.
Okay, Shefali, Dipanjan, and Priya, do you think the Indian
Yeah.
data good? Any comments
So,
on MRI?
No, I would not do MRI at baseline, of course, until unless patient shows some kind of threshold for symptoms, be it any milder symptom, then I would definitely like to go for it.
Dipanjan? You're
So
mute.
you're doing
Dipanjan.
MRI only for lung cancer as a baseline, not for breast.
Okay.
Unless-
Priya, you feel differently? No, Priya doesn't feel differently. She's quiet. Okay, that's rare for her. So she clearly does not feel differently. Thank you very much. I think I'll conclude by saying that HER2 is clearly a difficult disease to manage. I'm very impressed by this escalation of care, and I think I'm already seeing that it is an option which is showing benefit because we've used it almost 3 years ago or 2 years ago in a patient, and that was very high residual disease. We were sure it's going to come back. And I think we'll know more as we go ahead. And I think neratinib, tucatinib, and Enhertu, we'll be talking a lot more in the years to come, but they will change the paradigm further. Thank you very much, and thank you, Gopal.
Thanks,
and organizers
Nilesh, for
having me.
excellent moderation as always. Only your
Yeah.
panelists
Yeah.
are not up to the mark.
Thank you, Nitesh. Yeah. Yeah, thank you,
Nice
Nitesh. Thank you,
Stay safe.
panelists.
Stay safe.
Yeah, yeah, stay safe.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Very
you,
lot of
chairpersons.
practical points and take homes for everyone.
Yes, yes, ma'am.